So in a recent coaching session that I did, a student had asked me, how do you actually cook a board and still top 4? So in today's video, I kind of want to go over and extrapolate on this question a bit more because I think it's a really good question and not a topic that I think a lot of players are really covering. It's one of the most interesting and fun ways to play TFT, but sometimes even if you have a bunch of strong upgraded units on your board, you still end up losing out and it can feel incredibly undeserved. So let's exactly talk about the science and break down how you can cook and still top 4 with boards. And if you want to get coaching, you can check out my website at projectbykai.com and check out Project Patch. But let's get started. So first off, let's go over the quick basics. First off, what exactly is cooking in TFT? Well, essentially, when it comes to TFT, when we talk about cooking, you're essentially trying to put together a board that is either unoptimal or unexplored by playing units that don't typically go together, or really, it's also known as like deviating off the main line. If you've played chess before, you might have heard something similar to that before. On average, you're more likely to not be able to win out the whole lobby, but you can still perform pretty well because optimized boards are more likely to win out. That is just the cold hard truth. Where to find optimized boards, you might ask? You can go over and check TFT Academy, no ad. They have the best UI in terms of website to understand what comps are doing well. But you can also check out tactics.tools. They have lots of numbers and stats, but if you know how to digest them, that is a very strong tool as well. Maybe we'll go over that in another video. And MetaTFT is also good as well. You can also check out their website. Easy to look and understand, but their UI is not as digestible. There's a lot of numbers everywhere, so that can be a little bit difficult, but they're also a good resource as well. But I do believe TFT Academy is sort of like the easiest one to go to compared to everything else. But the best practice that you should always be doing, though, is to cross-reference your different sources and use your own experiences to formulate your own understanding of the optimized boards. And why is it important to know about the optimized boards in order to cook unoptimized boards? Well, simply put, cooking isn't easy. The pros of cooking means that you get to explore really fun ways to play TFT. It's, again, one of the most fun and interesting and cool ways of playing TFT. It's what gets people addicted to playing this game. And if you optimize an unorthodox build to the point where you are consistently gaining LP, you've essentially created what's called tech that you can use for free ranked gains. But I want to add a bit of a disclaimer here. You shouldn't expect this to happen too often, especially if you happen to be in lower elo, aka anything below like challenger really, or anything below GM really, because the reality is that your cooked board and your tech may not work the higher you climb, but at the highest level, players are good enough that if they discover tech, they're usually good enough fundamentally to abuse it. That being said, the final pro is that top 4s are significantly more rewarding because you really feel like you put in the effort to cook an interesting and incredible board, but still being able to win out. But there are a couple of really strong cons as well, so just keep these in mind. First off, it's very frustrating when it doesn't go well. You'll often hear, I deserve this win, just look at my board. A lot of times you might have cooked a board where the trait web looks really interesting and it all seems to fit together really well, but you still end up losing out, and that can feel super frustrating, and you go, oh my god, the game is horribly unbalanced. I cannot believe this, right? Another thing to know as well is that the more unbalanced the game is, the less options you have to cook with, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that exactly means. And finally, it's not as flexible as you might expect. When you think about cooking and discovering boards in TFT, you might view it in a way that it feels like these players are just buying and upgrading units, just jamming them onto their board, and it just kind of all makes sense and comes together. But there is a method to the madness, and it's not as ludicrous as just buying any upgraded unit and jamming onto your board. That being said, in order to cook, you have to understand your ingredients. What exactly do you need in order to cook a board? First off, you need a very strong understanding of the meta. If you do not have a strong understanding of the meta, you won't know what units or what ingredients you can use in order to actually cook. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Second off, you need to have a strong understanding of unit catalysts and enablers. Essentially, what makes a unit go from good to strong. For example, units like Yunara really like augments like Messal, like Soul Awakening, or having a build that is Ginsy's IE Titans, her best in slot. This is what makes her go from mediocre to a very strong unit. If you've ever played Yunara without an IE, you'll understand what I mean by Yunara feels a bit mediocre at times. Another thing to note is that there are other opportunities that exist as well. Things like, for example, in Tryndamere reroll, you want to have an artifact ideally on Tryndamere because it makes him so much stronger. Darkened Sight is a really good artifact for a unit like Yasuo. There are augments that can enable compositions as well. Things like Too Much Value makes it really strong to play compositions like Nico and Aphelios. Knowing these catalysts that make comps go from good to incredible is what's really going to help you understand what tools are available to you when you want to try to cook a board. Another thing, number 3, for your ingredients, understanding that you cannot cook every game if your expectation is to try and top 4 every game that you play. Sometimes the reality is that if you want to win, you just gotta throw the fries in the bag and play an honest Yunara Ionia game or just an honest Seraphine Lysandra. That's just the game sometimes. And if you want to top 4 consistently, you have to understand that sometimes you just gotta put the fries in the bag, bro. Number 4, the strong understanding of the trait tree and how it provides board value. So just a couple examples. For example, 2 Quick Striker provides your whole team 50% attack speed. 2 Bruiser gives your whole team 100 HP. 2 Defender gives your whole team flat armor and MR. Knowing these things is really useful when it comes to cooking because you know how to flex in a unit and understand pretty immediately what that value is just based off the trait tree alone. Not every trait is as generous as traits like Quick Striker, Bruiser, or Defender. Things like Juggernaut is a very selfish trait. It only benefits the Juggernauts. Things like Warden only benefits the Warden. So make sure that when you are trying to flex and cook a board, you keep this in mind when it comes to the trait tree. Number 5, strong understanding of important splash units. So again, a couple examples. Shyvana gives your whole team damage reduction. Senna gives your whole team damage reduction and some damage amp. Fiddlesticks provides AoE CC. Targons provide utility, like Leona provides wound. Zoe provides shred, and Aphelios provides sunder. Skarner can provide armor for the whole board, and etc. There's so much more that you can know. And understanding these important splash units, again, it's really useful when it comes to cooking your board and trying to put stuff together. Number 6, your strong fundamentals, specifically filling the gaps. What is your board missing in order to succeed? And this is probably one of the most important when it comes to cooking the boards, because in order to cook a board, you need to understand what my team is lacking in order to succeed. Are you lacking frontline units? Are you lacking a tank because you have a lot of damage, but your frontline is a piece of paper and they are just getting eaten alive because they don't have enough time to dish out enough damage? Do you have not enough damage? Maybe it's the converse. And despite the fact you have like a Garen too and like a Braum too for your frontline because you're cooking some strange stuff, but you don't have the damage. You have like a Yunara 1 with like a Ginsu's and like a Gunblade, and that's it. It's not going to provide enough damage for your board in order to really make sure that you are actually being able to kill the opponent's boards and succeed for yourself. Knowing these things are super important, but having a lack of frontline or having a lack of damage are 2 of the most obvious examples trying to figure out what gaps you're trying to fill. Finally, the last and really crucial thing as well is you must have some high HP early. I think what ends up happening sometimes is that players will cook a board. They'll play something like Warwick Seraphine, for example, which is like, it's actually like if you try the trait web, it actually makes a lot of sense. But the reality is that if you try to play Warwick Seraphine from a very low HP standpoint on like your 4-2 roll down, you might be able to upgrade the units and win a couple more rounds on stage 4, but because you didn't preserve any HP early and you're playing a board that is not as comparably strong as an optimized board, you're gonna just lose out and you're gonna go like 6th or 7th, and that wasn't on purpose, but you might, you know, have a terrible placement and you might be thinking to yourself, what the fuck went wrong? Right? So that's really important to know. When it comes to playing unoptimized boards or cooking boards, you must have the high HP early because it's very likely that you might fight 1 or 2 optimized players, especially playing highly optimized TFT to the point where they have like best in slot, best augments, best items, etc. And at that point, it's like your board, no matter how hard you cooked, it's not going to really beat that board unless you've cooked an exquisite board, but that doesn't happen very, very often. Most of the time, you will have to bleed out in those examples. But that being said, let's talk about some case examples. And the first one I want to talk about is this really cool Yasuo 3 ASOL board that myself, the Mustang Raptor, were actually in call, backstating Sub-Zero Arc, and he was the one who was actually piloting the board itself, but this was our end state board. And I want to talk about exactly how we got there. Now, obviously, if you're an experienced player, you might have an idea, but let's talk about the general game flow and why we were able to get to this point and still succeed with it. So, first off, knowing the following catalysts are very important. Dark Insight is Yasuo best in slot when it comes to Yasuo reroll. That's a really important thing to remember. Number 2, if you find an early Taric, you can consider playing ASOL, and it's actually significantly easier to play this ASOL line if you happen to find that early Taric, because he's usually the inhibitor from actually unlocking an ASOL throughout the early game, usually during stage 3. And then finally, Path of Blades is not a good Ionia when it comes to playing around Yasuo reroll. The main line when it comes to playing Yasuo reroll requires 7 Ionia. That is the main line. You play 7 of the Ionian units and you just, that's it, gung-ho, and you put a Kindred on your board and that's it. That's the level 8. But because we know that Path of Blades is not necessarily the best one when it comes to Yasuo reroll, then we can try to take down down to like 3 or 5 from 7, right? It's almost never 7 if we want to try to tech it down. The game flow of this game in particular, initially we were going to play Slayers with Dark Insight, and we're playing this game really casual. This is just a normal, just like competitive mindset, ranked grind ladder mindset of we're just gonna play what's tried and true. Let's just take a Darkened Scythe and play some Slayers. Now, you might be watching this if you're like high elo, you're like, well, shouldn't he have taken the bow if he's playing Slayers? Yeah, but we were a little bored and we took Scythe instead of bow. Oopsies, but it's fine. It's still totally okay, and both are very acceptable. But on 2-5, we actually ended up stumbling into the Yasuo as well for a Yasuo 2 super early that we naturally. And seeing this and knowing that we had Scythe already, despite the fact that we're going to play Slayers and play some like Ambessa and Bel'Veth stuff, we were like, well, okay, hold on. We have a Yasuo 2. Let's jam that onto the board and let's play into Yasuo reroll instead. And as you can see, as the game progressed over onto 3-2 down here, you can see that our strongest board at the time was naturally the 2 Targons alongside a Yasuo 2, and we're going to play this board until we actually find the Ionians and can slowly tech out of this board into a stronger 5 Ionia board, which is typically what you end up playing on level 6. That is basically the gameplay that we have for this. And moving forward, as you can see, we eventually, as we were rolling on stage 3 for Yasuo's, we found a very early Taric on 3-3. Now, obviously, if you're watching this and you go, well, we know he ended on Ace Soul, so obviously he's going to pick up the Taric. He's a high roller. This guy is so bad at the game. This guy's talking nonsense out of his ass. But the reality is that if you are playing Yasuo reroll and you see this Taric, 9 times out of 10, you are going to skip it. You're not going to think about it because you're really just sitting there thinking, okay, I'm just going to keep playing this Yasuo line. I must find the Ionians. I must keep finding copies of Yasuo. This Taric means nothing to me. I just want to find the Ionians. So it's important to identify that at times you will get these catalysts, these indicators, and being able to identify them is how you're going to be able to cook. So leading all the way up from the very beginning of the game up until 3-3, we were not going to cook a board. We were just going to play some standard Yasuo reroll and call it a day. But because we found ourselves in a position to high roll and find a catalyst that we could identify and actually utilize, now suddenly we can actually cook a board that caps even higher than what we were originally planning. So this is why we get to begin to cook. Again, Yasuo reroll is a strong line with Scythe. Ace Soul is the strongest line at the time. This is on the A patch of 16.3, not the B patch, so keep that in mind. And in Yasuo reroll, the main line is to play vertical Ionia, but because we know the Path of Blades is not good, again, we can tech down out of 7 and fit in some Targons instead and put an Ace Soul in the back instead of a Yunara, which is typically the way that it goes. Now, keep in mind that you have to, as you cook, think about how you're going to sort of, you don't have to know your general end state, but you have to know the general core of what you're working with, right? And what we could identify immediately is that if we wanted to play around this instead, the Ace Soul instead, then we know that if we're going to tech from 7 Ionia down to 5, then we should consider, okay, if it's going to be 5, then we need to think about what else we're going to put onto our board, right? 5 makes a lot of sense. If you think about it, you get Yasuo, you get Yone, you get Shen, Wukong, and Set. That's 5 Ionia, 2 Bruisers, 2 Slayers, and the Set. Those 5 make perfect sense for the core that we can play around. It's very cost efficient. We're gonna probably be buying all these units anyways, so we might as well just play that 5 core. Plus the Ace Soul is 6. We only need to slot in 2 more units, and I don't have a picture of it on the board at the moment, but you can kind of picture it in your head. We need a bit more frontline, right? Frontline seems to be the name of the game here. If we have a bit more frontline, that would make a lot of sense. But lo and behold, by utilizing the 5 Ionia core, then we can actually put in the Targons that we found, because we found the Taric early, remember, and we also found the Leona 2 that we're going to hold anyways because we needed it to unlock the Ace Soul eventually. So if that's the case, just jam the Targons on the board. It's super cost efficient because we already have it. We play 5 Ionia, we play the 3 Targons, and that's it. And we go straight to 9. As you can see, this is Sub-Zero Arc's HP. He's 74 HP, level 8 on this board, and life is good. It is super easy to just cruise all the way to 9. You have a decent enough frontline with the Leona 2. You don't have to dig for that Wukong. You have a Yasuo 3 already, who's a lot of damage and technically frontline as well. The Yone, who's also going to provide a little bit of extra more damage, and the Ace Soul to just clean everything up if anything is still amiss. And as you can tell, at the end of the game, he actually ends up going second here. He should have went first, but he was basically arguing with me and Raptor and Call, saying, I can win this fight. And we were like, no, you have to sell your units to find the 2-star Ace Soul, because that's the only thing that wins this fight. Blah, 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 blah. I'll link the VOD below if you want to go watch it, but he ends with a strong second, but still could have been first in a really cool cook to end this game out. Now, I want to go over one more case example, because as you might have heard, that last example was on the last patch. It was on, well, not the last patch, it was on 16.3a. This game was on 16.3b. So if you're like, well, what the fuck, why was I listening to that? Because on a different patch. Here, let me throw you this one. This was a T-Hex Galio board cooked by myself, and let's talk about how we got here. Is a 5 Demacia 4 build over game. So first off, the way that we got to this point is knowing some of the following. First off, by knowing that Piltover emblem exists, and if you get it early, it's really easy to unlock a T-Hex in the early game, specifically even like early stage 3. So just keep that in mind. And the second one is the Demacian emblem makes it actually pretty easy to unlock Galio, because these emblems, by the way, if you don't understand why it's easier to unlock these units with the emblem, it's because you can get an upgraded 2-star of any unit and then put the emblem on them, and that counts as +2 towards the unlock condition. Piltover, you need 9-star levels, and for Galio, you need 12-star levels of Demacian. So again, those emblems make it a bit easier. And finally, another thing to note as well is that the earlier augments portal makes it easier to potentially find a lot more emblems really quick to even potentially unlock things even faster. As you can tell in the screenshot, on 2.1, 2.2, and on 2.6, there were augments that were available. So you just got to keep that in mind, that that was also something that could exist in this game, because you could get things like Trait Tree on 2.2, etc., and just like really find direction really quick, or more unlocks. So it's really important to know the following. First off, Seraphine is the strongest meta forecast AP carry in the current meta, so flexing her into your board generally can usually be a good thing. Another thing to note is that 6 Piltover is achievable with Emblem 1 Stage 3, we talked about this, but more importantly, Mining Drill is 6 gold a turn. If you can hit Mining Drill on like 3-2, you're generating a fuck ton of money. It means that you can also greed holding the Demacians early and lose early econ breakpoints, since you'll make the econ back with Mining Drill. Of course, it's not guaranteed, but even a combat 6 Piltover means we just get a free win streak for a long time anyways, and that win streak can be utilized to generate money. Now, if 6 Piltover does equal Mining Drill, then we can always take down to 4 Piltover later down at the end of the game for more combat power. You never really see people ending the game on 6 Piltover if their 6 Piltover mod is Mining Drill, because you're basically playing 2 reverse fawns on your board, or excuse me, you're playing 2 shitty Piltover units on your board instead of putting in legendary units that would provide significantly more combat power, and Mining Drill itself, the mod, does not provide combat power. You know what I'm saying? And finally, Vertical Demacia. You typically tech down to 5 Demacia from 7 when playing the vertical when you're trying to cap out, since 7 doesn't actually provide that much more combat value. There's like a bit of an HP like smite, I think, but the reality is that 5 and 7 actually provide the same amount of armor and MR. So it's actually very, very similar in terms of a breakpoint. So that's why you see a lot of pros and top players tech from 7 to 5. That is a lot of base knowledge that you need to understand, but let's talk a little bit about the game flow. First off, spreading roots on 2-1, that's what I ended up clicking. As you can guess, I got a Piltover and Demacia emblem, and it's also a free Orianna unlock on 2-1, so that can also help preserve a little bit of HP, since Orianna is a very, very strong 2-cost early game unit. Now, as the game progresses on 3-1, I got very fortunate and found a Seraphine naturally on 3-1. It makes it even easier to unlock the T-Hex, but keep in mind that even if I didn't find this Seraphine, I could still find a 2-star Vi, a 2-star Orianna, etc., and still be able to unlock T-Hex with no problems. So despite the fact that it is high roll, it isn't like super high roll, not to sound like a different TFT streamer. But that being said, we ended up rolling on 3-2 to get the damage spike with Orianna 2 plus the T-Hex, and as you can see in the screenshot below, on 3-2, this bottom one is from 3-2, we already unlocked T-Hex and have a 3-3 T-Hex with Mining Drill unlocked. And because we got the Mining Drill, we can continue to cook. So we can keep holding on to the Demacians that we've been holding on our bench this whole time, and despite the fact that we lost econ intervals, again, we are rewarded to hold them because we can continue to do so because we got Mining Drill, because Mining Drill will be what brings our econ back up to speed. Had we had missed the Mining Drill, then we could consider selling most of the Demacians to recover our econ and play for win streak gold, and that is okay as well, although admittedly it would not be ideal. Now, as the game continues, I ended up going on a 7 streak with 6 Piltover in. I just kept it in until I lost a fight, and then I ended up losing the very last fight on 4-6, but I ended up unlocking Galio on 4-7 during neutrals, and by stage 5, I already had Galio and T-Hex ready to go, and a lot of money and HP to go straight to 9, and essentially secure my board. So, after securing a guaranteed stars on 9, let's fundamentally think about our current board state, right? With Garen 2-starred on our front line, we have our front line secured. We have a very tanky, beefy boy. 5 Demacia is a strong breakpoint for the Garen. That's when he does his best. And on top of that, we have potentially in a 0 on the way where it can provide disruptor and even more front line. So our front line is very good. We're level 9, we're chilling, everything is good and dandy. In terms of damage as well, our backline damage is honestly good enough. We have a Seraphine 2 already on our board, and we also have the T-Hex 1 ready to go. So those two should be enough to just be able to be stable for the rest of the stage, aka stage 5, and then we can now finally tech down out from 6 Piltover and cap out our board. And as you can see here, this is what the actual fights look like in case you're interested, but I'll just let the clip play for itself. But I was fighting a very strong Alawi 3 board with like incredibly max capped bilge water. This was really tough game, and this board, his board, wins out most games 95-99% of the time, I would say. So the fact that this fight is even close, and the fact that I'm actually even beating his board, is a testament to the fact that this board itself, by cooking and still knowing what is good and what is strong, but still being able to know what you flex in, is incredibly important and shows that it is possible to win fights like these. And if you got any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments below. I hope this video was helpful. This is just a screenshot from that same game where he said you cooked, and I just, you know, I had the coaching session and then this happened and I was like, I gotta talk about it. So anyways, if you got any questions, feel free to leave in the comments below. If anything was redundant, or if you had any other questions, or maybe I talked about something that I didn't exactly cover it, please let me know, and I'll see you guys all later. Take care, guys. Happy club.